Today we are going to move to Satanism and the occult, and this is going to be hoping to get through 3 more different world religions, false religions. We're going to focus on this one for today and half of next week. Then we're going to focus on Islam, and then we're going to see what we have time for after that, because I want to make sure that with our schedule here at this point, we're just getting through what we need to get through, and then we're leaving time if we want to spend a little bit more time in certain areas here. But before we jump in there, I want to show you something that I found interesting. So this was last weekend, last Saturday. My wife and I, we went downtown and we were passing out some information to various businesses to just get some PR going. First one you'll see here is her piano studio that she just had her first recital with yesterday. Very proud of her and the work that she's doing there. But as we were passing those out to some local businesses to put up, I also asked them to put up a Vacation Bible School flyer. So this is at Chelly Belly's here in town. So we asked these people to put this up. This last Friday, a couple days ago, I was there eating lunch with a guy who used to work here that retired, Bill, our former maintenance guy here. And so as I was there, I decided, I'm going to take a picture of this and send it to Anna, because Chelly Belly's, they weren't there, so we left a note and we put it in their little box there. So then I take this picture, and after I take it, I'm looking at it. This is well after I leave the restaurant, and I notice something. I notice what is under her piano lessons here. And I see there, I know it's hard to read. In Delaware, Ohio, where is this stuff here, we see Dianetics take control of your mental health, and then they have, I believe that's the QR code to be able to go on Amazon and get the book. So that's here in town, right in downtown Delaware. So when we say, well, some of this isn't here, well, the influences of it clearly are. So I found that pretty interesting and something I wanted to share. But as we go through Satanism and the occult this week and part of next week, you have my word on this, that what we're going to be looking at, we're going to keep PG. There were some concerns that were raised. There may be a couple people that aren't here because they just said, I'm not sure about studying that. And I understand that. But that being said, the Bible does speak to these things. We'll talk through some of that. And it is something where there are a lot of influences around us and we need to be very careful with. And so I do think it's definitely something worth studying, but we want to be careful with it. So we're going to begin our time then by studying what a Satanist is. And we will as well look at the occult. But let me ask you this to begin with. Do any of you have any experiences that you would like to share, again, keeping it PG, that with folks that you have interacted with that have called themselves Satanist or practiced occult practices? And we'll define occult here in just a couple minutes. But do any of you have any experiences there that you'd like to share about? Yep, Keith?
When I was in high school, a friend of mine went to church for several years. He dabbled in it for about a year and a half.
Okay. Can you share some of the things that he dabbled with? Like,
Well, there was a Satanic church probably about 15 miles from us growing up.
really?
He went there for hopefully 6 months.
Where was the Satanic church at? Really? Okay. That's interesting to me. Is I know there's some in the Midwest. There's not a ton of them in the Midwest. So that's interesting. Actually, a lot of them are in Florida. Anyone else? So there was a friend of mine back where I grew up in West Virginia. There was a boy that I went to youth group with. And then, so my story was I went to youth group at a church very similar to Delaware Bible Church, but about probably 30% of the size of DBC, but very similar to us. And so I went to that church growing up, and there was a boy that I was in youth group with that was several years younger than me. I didn't know him too well. But then I went to Bible college, I get done with Bible college, and then I go back home and I work at another church. It was a larger church, about 12 miles from where I grew up, and that was in West Virginia. So I'm on the Ohio border. I work at this church as an intern in West Virginia. And so as I work at this church in West Virginia, there was a boy there that was now college-age student. And this boy, one of my ministries was I oversaw the college and career ministry there. So I would run their Sunday school class and some different things. And this ended up being the boy that I was in youth group with. Now, it was interesting to me because he went there to church, but he called himself a Satanist. This was something that when I looked at what he believed, it wasn't Satanism in the sense that I think of devil worship. It was more polytheistic, where he kind of had layers of Hinduism, where he would believe in this God and he believed in this, but he was still really developing his theology. And he was a kid who, I would say, did a lot of it for show. This was kind of before most churches had like dedicated full-on security teams like we do now, but they had several men that basically served as that, and they always had an eye on him. And he would always come to my Sunday school class where I was teaching Christian doctrine. And so I just befriended him, got to know him, and I saw a lot of it from him wasn't really devil worship Satanism, but it was a guise that they used for, these are some common doctrines that I share that we're going to work through a little bit, and I'll share his story throughout. But with that, one of the ways that we're going to see that, and I'll illustrate this, is through this event that just happened a couple weeks ago. Now, Satanism just held what is called their SatanCon conference in Boston, and the event was sold out. They had it the previous year. I think it was around 300 people that came. This past year, they had around 800 people who attended from all over. And so I want to share with you a brief video that gives you a little bit of insight into the conference. And I want you to tell me some things that you notice or that stick out to you from your time watching it. So what are some of the things that you noticed from that video and from particularly the guy who shared? Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying, but that was really, they don't believe in the Satan that we read that we believe to be literal in the Bible. And that's where the friend that I had, it was very similar on that.
They're just deceiving themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're misunderstood.
Right. And that is a key piece, though, is that's what they're saying about us is, no, we misunderstand where they are on it. Now, at that event, for some of the events there, they had unbaptisms, they had where they were tearing apart Bibles, and they had some things that were very clearly mocking Christianity as well. So there are layers to it where they say it's anti-religious, but there are parts of it that we'll see that really just mock Christians as well. So there is influences that we see clearly in our community and clearly around. Most of these people, though, are not in organized religions for this. There are some churches. Keith mentioned one that he knew growing up. A lot of the ones that I read are with founders of the movement or things like that. There's not a lot of them, but there are different churches for it. I didn't think to look up ones in our area. Maybe I'll do that for next week. Yep, Marvin?
Interesting. I haven't studied extensively at all, but they had the rainbow flag.
They did. Excellent.
And then we're even talking to one guy who was saying it's all about women's bodily autonomy, so trying to appeal to a particular, another group of people.
Mm-hmm. They are, and it's very, a lot of their stuff that you will see is very human rights driven, politically driven, some different things there that we'll look at. And so in some ways, you will see that some of their strategies are the same as some of the liberal churches that we've talked about too. But Ron Rhodes from The Challenge of the Cults and New Religions, you've heard me share about that book before. It's one that we'll continue to use through this study. It says that Satan is a form of religious belief and expression holding to the worship of Satan. Whether Satan is defined as a supernatural person, a deity, the devil, a supernatural force, a natural force, an innate human force, or most commonly, the self. So it's very, again, pluralistic. You can believe what you want it to believe. It can be actually Satan. It could be yourself, whatever you want to define it as.
I don't know if you said it, but this reminds me of the quote that said Satan's biggest accomplishment was convincing people he doesn't exist.
Yeah. Who was that? That's a good one.
I don't know that it was Mark Twain, but it smacks of Mark Twain.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. So, that being said, some Satanists believe what the Bible says about Satan and even about God, understanding that they may have to suffer eternal punishment in hell for following after Satan. But others hold to a dualistic concept in that God and Satan are the opposite spiritual forces. And we've talked through other cults about the idea of God being like a force, right? That a human can use Satan or satanic principles to attain their goals in life. So again, there's different views of how people view this and how they can attain what they want from it. Others then believe that Satan is a force that governs all nature. He can achieve one's personal desires in life, and similar to that concept of the force. Now that being said, the majority, we saw it in that video, I shared the piece about my friend there, the majority use the term Satan then as a metaphor, and it symbolizes their rejection of Christianity. Some of them would say that Christianity is powerless, involving only self-sacrifice, self-denial, and oppression. And you will see that they're very strong on the terms that they use, particularly against Christianity, but mostly against organized religion. So in some ways they are an organized religion, but in other ways they're kind of an organization that's against organized religion there. Now those who hold to this view, they're not going to hold to an actual existence of God, but they're mostly focused then on the power of self and how to gratify self. And often they're mocking Christianity or other religions with that. They say that Satan is a symbol of fleshly human desires and appetites. They desire self-gratification over self-denial, and that's going to be in their tenets that we'll study. So we have Satanism, but then we also have the occult. And they are similar to one another, but they're not exactly the same thing. So if we were to look at the American Heritage Dictionary, it would define occult as relating to or dealing with supernatural influences, agencies, or phenomena. The occult encompasses several philosophies and religious exercises that include physical and metaphysical energy accessible only to those with secret wisdom or power. It involves such practices as divination, magic, and we'll talk about those in just a second, Satanism, Spiritism, UFO cults, and witchcraft. This is from the apologetics resources that we've been studying through the North American Mission Board there. But so with the occult, it can have satanic principles, but you could go to a lot of other religious groups, psychological groups that are going to put layers into this. You could say in some senses that as we studied Dianetics, as we studied Scientology, you're going to see parts of that in here. In some parts of Hinduism, you may be able to see bits and pieces of this. So there's in other philosophies there as well. But that being said, often we see forms of divination. And when we think of divination then, those are the practices that seek to foresee or foretell the future. They want to find out hidden knowledge, and this is often by interpretation of omens by supernatural powers. Now, this is going to include crystal ball gazing, Ouija boards, palm readings, tarot cards, reading tea leaves, and there are actually businesses in this community, one's not too far down the block from us, where you can go and you can obtain some of the things to be able to do some of these things. But this is called then divination, where they're trying to do these, where they're trying to understand these things. And so one thing I would encourage you in is, if you're looking at palm readings, if you're looking at crystal ball gazing, Ouija boards, I would stay away from all of them, because best case scenario, you're going to have a kooky person telling you something that's not accurate. Worst case scenario, you're getting into some pretty bad stuff. It's interesting, though, in the Old Testament, this was an issue not only now, but back then. And we can look at passages in the Pentateuch where it talks about this. It says, for example, Leviticus 19:31, "Do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God." Another one in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 through 12 say, "When you come into the land of the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer." Medium being the one we'll talk about in just a minute, that then is saying that they connect with people that have passed on. "For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you." Now, we are no longer under the law, but God's character remains the same, and God still feels the same way about those who are participating in these things. Now, sometimes, though, so we see the divination, right, the fortune telling or those kind of things, but there's also spiritualism. And that is the belief that the living communicate with the dead through some type of medium. The Bible is very clear on this, that it is appointed to man once to die and then the judgment. And once you're in heaven or hell, there's no going back either way. The Bible speaks to this as well. It speaks to it through the other verses that we looked at, but also in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 19, it says, "And when they say to you, 'Inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God?'" Why are you going to these people? Go to your God. "Should they inquire the dead on behalf of the living?" Now, some of this is occult practice, but some of it is quite honestly a money grab. And this is the stuff that you'll see on television, where someone asks very basic questions about someone that you could almost ask of anyone who's passed away, and it brings up a thought or a memory if it's not rehearsed on television already, and then they basically make a TV show production of, showing, I was able to talk to this person, and this is what they shared with us, and they try to bring closure to that person there. Leviticus, again, "A man or a woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones, their blood shall be upon them." And we see this throughout the scripture of witches, of warlocks, of these people being stoned, being burned, God not having any tolerance for this. With that, though, one thing that we're going to see over and over again is the majority who participate in these practices, they don't hold to one strict religious belief or grouping there. They dabble in parts of all of it. So there's going to be people that call themselves Satanists that are going to dabble with Ouija boards, tarot cards, that may say, I can call someone from the dead. They may partake in a couple of satanic rituals. And so most of them are not going to call themselves part of a formal organized religion. And as we're going to see, there's not some strong doctrinal statement that's going to be a part of what all of them are believing there. Most of them have a very eclectic mix of beliefs, and a lot of times, as Marvin noted, their politics are going to play a role into their belief structure with this as well. As we think about Satanists, I think the first thing that we've looked at and shown you is that it's much broader than we often think. And so I want to give you, this is from Ron Rhodes, again, The Challenge of the Cults and New Religions, his 6 categories of Satanists. From here, we're going to look at what are the doctrines that Satanists holds to, or what are the main things that they hold to there. So as we look at 6 categories of Satanists, the first one that we would see is the traditional Satanists. This is generally what we think of, and that they are the ones that engage in various rituals based on traditional Christianity and Catholicism, except it's going to be reversed. So they will do things such as, for example, say the Lord's Prayer backwards. They will put animal blood in the communion cup. They will tear apart the Bible, as we talked about. They will do an unbaptism, as there are videos of them doing at that conference in Boston. So take your Christian faith, take the Catholic traditions, and basically go in reverse for them. And you can see very clearly they're mocking what we believe. Secondly, then, we see the self-styled Satanists, and these are the ones that aren't affiliated with any official satanic or occultic group. They make their own brand up based on what they read on the subject. And there are, I saw this from my friend that I mentioned to you, there are online groups where a lot of these folks kind of have their fellowship time together. One FBI report stated that teenagers often turn to Satanism, quote, to overcome a sense of alienation, to obtain power, or to justify their antisocial behavior. For these teenagers, it is symbolism, not the spirituality, that is important. And that is a true thing. But let me say this as well, that there are influences here that you have to be very careful of. So a teenager may be rebelling and saying, well, this is what I am. And one of the things that I would say to that teenager is, you may not really truly believe in these things, but there are influences here that could cause some major damage to your life, both physically and spiritually. So be really careful there. This is from that apologetics article again. It says, self-styled Satanists are often young people who are introduced to Satanism through listening to heavy metal music or by watching movies that glamorize it. Heavy metal music is more influential in introducing young people to Satanism than books or movies. Songs that exalt abuse of women, anger, violence, aberrant sexual behavior, dying, and Satanism typify heavy metal music. Many young people would dabble in Satanism by reading books on it, but never get involved in the rituals. Others will get so involved that they will go on to create their own self-styled form of Satanism. The groups that these self-styled Satanists form are very diverse and tend to borrow from many sources. They make up their beliefs and practices as they go. Much of the documented violence associated with satanic groups comes from self-styled Satanists. Now you may say to me, Brad, is all heavy metal music inspired by Satanism? And I would say probably not. But really, again, as we look at influences here, we've got to be careful. As well, then, we have the religious Satanists. And these are members of the satanic churches. They often prohibit ritualistic harming of living beings, and they prohibit illegal activities. So these are the ones that are making money on the religion, right? They're pushing it out there. They have a church. They have an organization. We'll see a little bit of that as we look at the history of the religion. But most of them are not doing the illegal activities, at least from a functional church perspective. They aren't doing it there. A lot of the people as well are dabblers, and they are involved but not totally committed. They mainly experiment with homemade rituals and practices. And as we see, a lot of these places in town or around that sell some of these different things, that sell Ouija boards, that sell some of the things that they may use for rituals, a lot of the group that they're appealing to are dabblers, of ones who may hold to some of these type of beliefs, but they also may hold to some New Age beliefs about crystals bringing healing powers or different things like that. So again, it's often a very eclectic mix. When it comes to religious Satanists, they say that religious Satanists are members of formal satanic groups, and many of these religious Satanists do not believe in either God or Satan. So they're a religious group that doesn't believe in neither God nor Satan. Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, claimed that he did not believe in the existence of a literal Satan. He asserted that Satan is a symbol of humanity's ego, lust, and greed. LaVey rejected the existence of sin, heaven, hell, life after death, and anything supernatural. So the founder of the religion states, I don't have a belief in a literal form of Satan. So what is this religion then focused on? Well, it's focused on just self-worship, of getting what I want in the way that I want, and of pushing that. There are outlaw Satanists. Those are the ones that are focusing on drugs, vandalism. Again, often heavy metal music plays a part in it, but they are the ones that often are doing illegal things. And then number 6, psychotic Satanists. Those are individuals who are mentally deranged. Sometimes they claim to hear voices, believing that Satan is directing them to do something that is destructive, or then they're going to do that to something or someone. So there are different categories here that we need to be very careful with. And as we think of those categories then, let's look at the roots and the history of this movement. And that being said, much like Hinduism, as we studied, it's hard to trace a definite timetable of when Satanism started, right? We could say ultimately it started after the fall, right? Or actually prior to the fall, was the angels were following Satan instead of God, right? But we're just going to focus on a couple of key figures here within the movement. And the first one that we're going to focus on is a guy named Aleister Crowley, and he grew up in a strict fundamentalist Plymouth Brethren church in England. Now, early on, he said that he was preferring the evil characters in the Bible over the good one. And he then went, and as the case with a lot of the other modern cults, false religions that we've studied, he decided, I'm going to go off and I'm going to travel and I'm going to study and I'm going to come up with my own doctrine that I believe. So he went to be a world traveler, and he went to Cairo, Egypt. It was there in Cairo, Egypt, where he said he received angelic revelations. And he wrote a book called the Book of the Law. Interestingly, we talk about where they often want to do things the opposite of Christianity. What's the Pentateuch? It's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's the law, right? So what does he name his book? The Law. And he later wrote another book called Equinox. Many of the ideas are foundational to Satanism, and we'll go through some of those tenets here in just a minute. He, though, really focused on 3 elements in his religious system. The first one being rejection of Christianity, the second one being supremacy of self, and the third one being use of magic to enhance one's experience or reach one's goals. And I think this is a good summation of the religion right here. What do they believe? Well, they reject Christianity, self is number 1, and they can use magic, they can use other occult practices in order to reach their goals. This is a picture, or a couple pictures of him. And I don't watch a lot of horror movies. I don't watch any horror movies. That's the one movie genre I'm not really into. Very hit or miss on sci-fi, but I don't do horror. But as I look at this guy, I think there have been so many horror movies that have a character that looks very similar to him. And I would guess that there's probably, they were rendering it from some of him. The other guy that we're going to look at is Anton LaVey. And he is probably the most famous Satanist today. I believe he passed in the 90s. But he witnessed the hypocrisy of some Christians and concluded that it was an irrelevant and powerless religion. So he then began in the 1950s the Church of Satan, sharing lectures and magic acts that became formalized over the next decade. So the other guy wrote some books on this. This guy started the Organized American Religion of Satanism. And as he did that, he said that Satanism is a blatantly selfish, brutal religion. It's based on the belief that man is inherently a selfish, violent creature, that life is like a Darwinian struggle for survival of the fittest, and that earth will be ruled by those who fight to win. That's his system of theology that he lived by. And here's a couple pictures of him. And if you were to look at a lot of the modern Satanism material, you're going to see this guy's face, and you're going to see a lot of the commercialism of it. A lot of the work that was done early on was done by this guy to make it considered to be I wouldn't call it a mainstream religion, but that's how they would characterize it. Now that being said, LaVey did 9 satanic statements. I want to share those with you, but I also want to share that in the introduction to the Satanic Bible, it gives more information about these statements, about what they mean, and about their purpose for their church there. This is the closest thing that we're going to get into as their doctrinal statement, and then we're going to get through a little bit more of like their practicing beliefs there. But number one, they say that Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. So first thing we see there, number one, is again, there is not a literal view of Satan in the religion. It's a view of self, and it's whatever we want to make of it. It can be a literal Satan. It can be whatever we want it to be in order that gives us an indulgence instead of abstinence. Where we deny ourselves in the Christian faith, they do the opposite. They indulge. Number two, Satan represents vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. And when I read some of this, I ask myself, number one, what are they saying? And number two, with the way that it's written, you can just see the very clear bent against Christianity. It's not enough to just say, this is what we believe. They got to push a shot at Christianity at the same time.
Brad,
Yes.
this is the guy who says he does not believe in a literal Satan, literal any of those things.
Correct. So he doesn't believe in a literal Satan, and yet he's pot-shotting Christianity the entire time with his religion.
Well, the cover of that book said something about wisdom from the devil's den.
Yeah, infernal wisdom from the devil's den.
Someone who doesn't believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you can tell,
Contradictory from the
oh yeah, it's contradictory from the start. And with this, I mean, when I look at this, this is going to be commercialized literature for them that's probably going to sell pretty well for their audience, right? So he's got clear parts of that in what he's sharing as well. But so, okay, what does he mean by this? Vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. This is what he says in the opening section of the Bible, of the Satanic Bible. He says, reality and existence are sacred, and the truth of that existence is to be honored and sought at all times, and never sacrificed for a comforting lie or an unverified claim one cannot bother to investigate. So what's his view of Christianity then? We're using this to comfort ourselves, and even though it has been tried and investigated more than any other religion, even though that the Bible's been tried and tested more than any other book ever has by a large margin, what does he do with it? No, people can't bother to investigate this. This is a lie. This isn't the truth. It's an unverified claim. So instead, I'm going to live in indulgence, enjoying my sacred life. Number three, he says that Satan represents undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. What does that mean? Well, he says true knowledge takes work and strength. It is something one finds rather than something handed to you. So where do you find knowledge? Not by the Bible, by God's revelation to us being given to you, but instead by working hard for wisdom and strength. Doubt everything and avoid dogma. Truth describes how the world truly is, how we would like it to be. Be wary of shallow emotional wants. All too often they are satisfied only at the expense of truth.
So that fourth sentence is internally inconsistent, contradictory.
So that being be wary of shallow?
It describes how the world truly is.
Oh yeah.
This was how we would like it to be.
Right. And so then I would ask him, what is truth? And he would probably say it's what you make of it, right?
But that doesn't describe how the world truly is.
Absolutely. And so, not only with this guy though, but as I saw with my friend, there were just inconsistencies throughout. Interestingly, the same guy that I shared with you about, then he really got into transgender ideology and going down that road. And I don't really have any connection with him anymore on social media or anything. I don't think he's on there anymore. But it was very much, often his posts were meant to stir things up, to draw attention. And the person that I knew lived a very isolated life. Family wasn't really involved much. Went to the Sunday school class that I was teaching, even though he called himself a Satanist, and was hearing Christian doctrine. I think he was just trying to have friends, you know. And so it is very inconsistent. But as you think of individuals in this line of thinking as well, oftentimes they just often need friends that are going to talk to them about these things. And why are you coming to these conclusions here? He says, Crawley says that Satan represents kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates. Again, opposite of Christianity. There is nothing in Satanism that encourages wanton cruelty or unkindness. There is nothing productive in that, but it is also unproductive to waste your energy on people who will not appreciate or reciprocate your kindness. Treat others as they treat you will form meaningful and productive bonds, but let parasites know that you will not waste your time with them. Now, if I call someone who is, you could say, wasting your time, but God is using them to sanctify me, let's say in a more Christianese way. If I call them a parasite, am I going to be able to have any inroads with them whatsoever? It's completely self-focused. Number 5, Satan represents vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Leaving wrongs unpunished merely encourages miscreants to continue preying on others. Those who do not stand up for themselves end up being trampled. This is not, however, an encouragement for misbehavior. Becoming a bully in the name of vengeance is not only dishonest, but it also invites others to bring retribution on you. The same goes for performing illegal actions of retribution. Break the law and you yourself become the miscreant that the law should come down swiftly and harshly. So there is still a sense of moralism, of we're not going to break the law in our religion here. If you hold to the official tenets of the Church of Satan in the Satanic Bible. Number 6, Satan represents responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. And I was like, man, what's a psychic vampire? They say that true leaders are identified by their actions and accomplishments, not their titles. Real power and responsibility should be given to those who can wield it, not to those who simply demand it. And as I read this, I think there's definitely some church hurt in there too, right? I agree that real power and responsibility should be given to those who can wield it. But that being said, our actions and our accomplishments kind of show who should have responsibility, who should be in power in a God-honoring way, right? Number 7, Satan represents man just as another animal, sometimes better, more often worse than those who walk on all fours, who, because of his, quote, divine spiritual and intellectual development, has become the most vicious animal of all. It's Darwin, survival of the fittest. Number 8, Satan represents all the so-called sins as they lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. In general, the concept of sin is something that breaks a moral or religious law, and Satanism is strictly against following such dogma. When a Satanist avoids an action, it is because of concrete reasoning, not simply because dogma dictates it or someone has judged it as, quote, bad. So it doesn't matter that the Bible, it doesn't matter that society may judge something as bad. Ultimately, Satanists avoid an action because of concrete reasoning. So there is framework for a moralistic worldview there, but at the same time, you just can't call it bad because somebody else calls it bad.
But there is no concrete reasoning. It's entirely, completely subjective. So how, I don't even, this doesn't even make any sense. Like as you're reading it, one sentence contradicts the next one, and how can one person say it, but then it's completely disproved by somebody else? But you can't prove it because it's not concrete.
Good.
It's completely,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Well,
Really inconsistent.
it's incredibly inconsistent with that, and as well along with this, they're holding their doctrinal statement together by people that are saying that Satanism can be whatever you want it to be. So try to put together an organized religion under doctrine that says, well, you can believe that Satan's literal and I don't have to do that. You can believe that Satanism is just the inward desires that push you towards getting what you want in life, and I can believe that it's a literal person that I'm worshiping. And then try to put all that together as you share. You can't. It doesn't make sense. It's absolute chaos. Then why have any religion?
Why even have Satanism, right?
Because there's something in here that they're seeking, right? Because the way that God has wired us, He has wired us for fellowship. He's wired us for worship. He's wired us for this. They're just going about it the wrong way. And so, excellent point, what's one thing that as we talk to people that are looking and searching for these things, we can give them true hope, right? I know that you're looking for this over here, but that's not going to lead you the way that you want to go. Let me tell you about who Jesus Christ is. Let me tell you about what He's done. And let me show you where my doctrine makes sense, where it works together, and where this goes all kinds of different ways. Excuse me, got something caught in my throat all of a sudden. In addition, when a Satanist realizes that he or she has committed an actual wrong, the correct response is to accept it, learn from it, and avoid doing it again. Not to mentally beat yourself up for it or beg for forgiveness. So don't...
killed that person, but it's okay, I won't do it again.
Yeah. Don't worry about your conscience. Don't worry about having to live with the consequences of your sins. Don't beat yourself up over it. Beg for forgiveness. That's the correct response is to learn from it and avoid doing it again. Last one. Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, and he has kept it in business all these years. I am not making any of this up.
But Satan doesn't exist, so how can he be a friend?
This last statement, here you go, here's your answer, is largely a declaration against dogmatic and fear-based religion. If there were no temptations, if we did not have the natures that we do, if there was nothing to fear, then few people would submit themselves to the rules and abuses they have developed in other religions, specifically Christianity, over the centuries. So, what do we see from this? We see a couple things. Number one, there are occult practices. There are people that take particularly Christian doctrine and do the opposite of it intentionally for these things. But as well, we can see that there are a lot of people who are just jumbling together this religion, and it, as we've said, it's theologically chaotic. It doesn't make any sense. But there are people that hold to this and gather together and want to do these things, and to mock Christianity and to be a part of this movement. And so with that, we have to be careful here, but at the same time, we have to realize, as we talked about, these people are searching for answers. And they have then 11 satanic rules of the earth. This will be the last thing that we go through. That these are basically their general guidelines that they are to live by. First one is, do not give opinions or advice unless you are asked. So, as a religion, for someone, or if you're going to get an opinion from someone, don't give it unless you're asked to give it. Let them do their own thing there. And I would say that falls in line with their doctrine. You do your own thing, you live your own life, you figure out your own God, you figure out your own worldview. Don't give opinions unless you're asked in this. Number two, do not tell your troubles to others unless you are sure they want to hear them. Number three, when in another's lair, show him respect or else do not go in there. So, for the first two, I think to myself, this is very much the opposite of living in Christian community with one another. It's very much antisocial behavior. And as I speak to the friend that I knew that was saying that he was a Satanist, it fit very well with him, right? He needed community, he needed people, he needed to be around other folks, but when it came to looking for help, when it came to looking for correct answers and how we should live, he just didn't want to hear it from anyone else. He just wanted to live in his own life, live his own world, and just kind of be a recluse. Number four, if a guest in your lair annoys you, treat him cruelly and without mercy. These are one after another. And these are, I am not making any of these up. This is in their satanic rules of the earth. Number 5, do not make sexual advances unless you are given the mating sign. Number 6, do not take that which does not belong to you unless it is a burden to the other person and he cries out to be relieved. So if a person is telling you, you know what, I have all this work that needs to be done on my house, and they're talking about the issues of life that they're facing, you know what you can do? Because they say it's a burden, you can go and you can take it, right? Not really, but that's what they're saying there. But you've got number 6 there, and then you have what they've talked about moralism, about not hurting other people, about not going to jail for certain things. So again, the inconsistencies show. Now that's 6. Why do I have 9 here? Do not harm little children. Do not kill non-human animals unless you are attacked for your food. And 11, when walking in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him. Now, I am missing 3 there. So let me look it up there. I don't know what it is. Sometimes when I transfer these slides over, I miss one. So let's look up the 3 that we're missing here. I am opening Church of Satan website here, so I'm trying to be careful here. Here we go. Number 7, acknowledge the power of magic. If you have employed it successfully to obtain your desires, if you deny the power of magic after having called upon it with success, you will lose all of you have obtained. So, if you're going to be involved in magic, if you're going to do these things, make sure that you're not going to deny it later. Number 8, do not complain about anything to which you need not subject yourself. And that's where we stopped right there. So, that being said, next week we're going to look at a couple of their other beliefs and we're going to look at their rituals there. But I know that what we've talked about is stuff. It is scary stuff. And we've got some of the rituals and things that we'll talk about next week as well as we conclude our time with this. Again, I promise you we'll keep it PG. But the thing for us to remember is that there are people that are truly holding to these things, or at minimum dabbling in it. And so when folks come to us and say, yeah, I've been messing with a Ouija board. Yeah, I've been doing these fortune tellings. Yeah, I've been studying these works. We need to be very careful with not only what we say to them, but our interactions with them on it, right? I'm very careful when someone says to me something along the lines of, I need a demon cast out, or I'm under demonic influences, or these kind of things. And it happens here in town. True story, nothing really amounted much to it. But this was several years ago. It was a night where we didn't have a Sunday night service here. And so I had the evening off, and I had family in town. I remember my nephews and my sister and her husband were in town. And so nothing was going on. We decided that we were going to come to the gym here on a Sunday night. We're going to shoot some hoops. So we come over to the gym, and there are a couple of teenagers that are hanging out right in front of the church entry. And I said, can I help you? Do you guys need anything? And they said, yes, we would like to talk to someone. It was one of the teens, said that they were suffering from demonic possession. This was right in front of the church here a couple of years ago. And I told them, I said, I'm one of the pastors here at the church. I'd love to talk to you, but we're unavailable this evening. You're going to have to come during the week and schedule an appointment with me. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to see, is this person just messing around, or are they serious about wanting help for this? Now, apparently, the person called the office, and I got a message where there was nothing really on it in my voicemail box. So it never came of anything. But my perspective was, I'm going to be very careful with this, even though I don't know if this is a teenager that's goofing around or something real. Let's put the ball in their court there. And whatever you do, when you're in situations like that, if that would have come where that person would have come to my office, somebody else, another spiritual leader would have been there, right? Don't go into those situations by yourself. But we'll talk more about the rituals and some of those things next week. But these things are all around us. Just like we talked about, even in our town, we see the Dianetics stuff up, right? We see these things too. Other thoughts, things before we go? Yep, Keith?
One of the worst things we can do with people that hold these views is to mock their beliefs,
Mhm.
mock them for their beliefs.
Right.
They, most of them have been hurt by people who call themselves Christians,
Mhm.
and they associate that with the church. And so they are finding some way to turn away from the church and fight against the church.
Mhm. Yeah.
Whether their views are consistent or not, they're searching for something besides Christianity.
Right. And as you say that, when you think through a lot of the principles that we looked at, you see a lot of that hurt in there. You know, this person hurts you. What do? Destroy them, right? Don't do this in the church. That's, don't forgive this person. If they do harm against you, retaliate however you want, or whatever the principle is, right? Do anything that you can unless it's illegal. Basically would kind of be the guiding principle there, right? So there is a lot of hurt there that we have to look for. And there's a lot of people that are, as I shared about the friend that I had, he was just, honestly, I think a lot of it was, he was looking for social interaction. Lived by himself, not around many people during the week, was not consistently holding a job, was not consistently being productive with his time. And then he would walk down to the church, and that was the one group of people that would talk to him, that would get to know him. And I'll tell you what, there were some times where I was just preaching Christian doctrine in that class, and he was hearing it, man. And so, to the best that I know, it didn't take, but similar as Keith said there, he had a lot of church hurt, primarily from his family that he was dealing with. And he saw that inconsistency then with all the inconsistencies in the church. So there is a lot of that there. All right, other thoughts before we conclude? Okay, we will finish up next week. We'll talk about rituals, we'll talk about the occult, we'll talk about some other parts of their beliefs. Then we will move into Islam. And so again, we will meet. Next week is the last meeting in May, so we have 3 more meetings that we'll have. May, the first 2 weeks in June, and then I don't have a scheduled time yet, but as we've talked about, I want to do a class that'll be called like Lesser Known Cults and World Religions, where we could do some different ones that we haven't studied yet, but that would still be good ones to study. And that'll probably be, sometime next year that we would look at. So let me close our time in prayer, and then we will be dismissed. Lord, again, we thank you for the opportunity to be here today. God, as we study this religion that is completely against what the Bible tells us is true, Lord, we see a lot of people who are hurting and who are searching for answers. And I pray that you would help us to provide help, to provide hope. Lord, that these people would see that there's a bunch of Christians here in Delaware, Ohio, who not only believe what the Bible says, but they live it out, and there's joy in doing so. Lord, each of us know people that either are practicing these things or know someone who is practicing these things, whether it be just dabbling in it or fully immersed in it. And I pray that you would help us to be able to give proper biblical guidance, or that you'd help us to be wise and careful. And Lord, that you would, through the power of your Holy Spirit, work change in the people who are in this system of beliefs, mindsets, or that you would change their hearts that you would work good, and that you would do it for your glory. And Lord, as we hear from your word, I pray that you would work through the power of your Holy Spirit here in our lives, both as we hear it here in just a few minutes from Pastor Scott, as we personally take time to read it and study it each week, and Lord, as we make time for our personal disciplines in our faith, Lord, help us to grow and to change and to be able to help all that we can with the truth of your glorious gospel. We thank you for this time when we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. You are dismissed.